"Strike it out," said the Duke of Quilmere. His sister looked up from the guest list with a pen suspended. "Everard, strike it out, Georgiana. I will not have a music mistress in this house on the night the admiral is honoured. She teaches scales to attorneys' daughters for 3 shillings an hour. She would be wretched among us, and we should all be wretched with her, and it is a kindness to spare her." "It is not a kindness," said his sister quietly, "and you know it is not." "Then it is not." He did not look up from the letter he was signing. "Strike it out." And so the name of Miss Honora Fell was drawn through with a single line of black ink, 4 days before the greatest ball to be given in that county in 20 years, and Everard Sancreed, 7th Duke of Quilmere, thought no more about her, which was, as he would afterwards reflect with a shame that never entirely left him, the truest measure of the man he then was. He was not a cruel man. He would have been astonished to hear himself called one. He was proud. Pride was a thing his family had bred for, as other families bred for a straight leg or a Roman nose, and Everard had been raised in the knowledge that Quilmere had stood for 400 years and would stand 400 more, and that the line between those who belonged inside its doors and those who did not was as real and as necessary as the wall round the park. He gave to the parish. He kept tenants dry. He had refused, on principle, to sell a cottage out from under a widow, and had been told he was generous, and had believed it. And he had once, in a crowded doorway at the Assembly Rooms at Markford, been introduced to a young woman in a made-over gown with music paper under her arm, who had looked him in the face and said, "How do you do, your grace?" in a voice of perfect composure, and had not simpered, and had not lingered, and had gone on to give a lesson for 3 shillings. He had thought about that voice more often than he cared to account for. He struck her name out anyway. The ball was for Admiral Lord Kestwick, who was 74 years old and had come home for the last time, and to whom the Duke of Quilmere owed rather more than the county knew. The county knew a little. It knew that the 6th Duke, Everard's father, had been a charming man with a taste for cards, and that things had been said in London in the last year of his life. It did not know how bad it had been. It did not know about the January morning when Everard, 23 and newly a duke, had sat in a cold office in the city and been told that the whole of Quilmere, the house, the land, the 900 people who lived on it, would be sold at Michaelmas, and that there was nothing whatever to be done. Nor did it know that a rough old sailor with a face like a mainsail had borne every one of those debts, at his own cost, in a single afternoon, had put the papers on the table in front of a young man who could not speak, and had said, in a voice like a gun deck, "Your father was my friend, boy. Pay me in behaviour." 22 years. He had never asked for anything else. He had never once mentioned it, in company or out of it, and when the Duke had tried, twice, to repay the money, the Admiral had looked at him with a kind of weary disgust and changed the subject. "Pay me in behaviour." The Duke of Quilmere had thought of that sentence perhaps 4 times a year, generally with satisfaction, as a man thinks of a debt of honour handsomely discharged. He had not thought of it at all on the morning he struck out the name of Honora Fell. The ballroom at Quilmere held 600, and it held 600 that night. Every family of consequence in 3 counties, 60 wax lights in the great chandelier and 40 more in sconces, the gold plate out, the orchestra brought from London at an expense that had made even his sister blanch. At 10 o'clock, the doors at the head of the stair were opened, and the major-domo struck the boards with his staff and announced, in a voice trained to carry across a room of 600 people, Admiral Lord Kestwick and Miss Honora Fell. The Duke of Quilmere turned. She stood at the top of his own staircase with her hand resting on the old man's arm. She was in white, not the fashionable white, not silk, a plain corded muslin some years old and beautifully kept, and there were no jewels at her throat at all, and her hair was dressed simply, and she was— He saw with a lurch that he felt in the soles of his feet, the only person in that entire gilded room who was not wearing something she could not afford. The Admiral was in his dress uniform, blue and gold, the star on his breast, one hand on the rail. And every head in the ballroom turned, and every fan stopped, and 600 people looked from the guest of honour to the girl on his arm, and then, as one animal, they turned and looked at the Duke of Quilmere, and waited to see what he would do. He had 4 seconds in which to make the finest recovery of his life. He crossed the floor. He mounted 3 steps. He bowed to the admiral, and then, because there was nothing else on God's earth that he could do, he bowed to Miss Fell. "Miss Fell," he said, "you are very welcome." She looked at him, and in her face there was no triumph whatever, not the flicker of it, and he understood with a dawning horror that was worse than any triumph could have been. She knew that she had been struck off. She had come anyway, on the arm of an old man she could not refuse, and she was going to stand in this room for 4 hours and be looked at by 600 people who'd all heard by now, because such things travel, that the Duke of Culmer had not thought her fit to be asked. "Your Grace is very good," said Honora Fell in that same composed voice. "I hope you will forgive the intrusion. My godfather was determined." "Your godfather?" "Since I was 3 days old," said Admiral Lord Kestwick, and his eyes, which had seen a great deal of weather, rested on the Duke of Culmer with a mildness that was in no way mild. "Her father was my sailing master for 11 years. He was drowned taking a boat out to a wreck off the Skerries in a sea no other man in the harbour would face, and he left a wife and a daughter and £140, and the wife is dead now too." He patted the small gloved hand on his sleeve. "Nora keeps herself by teaching. She has never taken a shilling from me and has told me to my face what I might do with my offers, which is the only time in 50 years anyone has spoken to me like that, barring one Spanish captain who is now at the bottom of the sea." "Godfather," said Miss Fell, "I am telling him." "You are making a speech, which is a different thing, and the whole room is listening." "Let it listen," said the Admiral comfortably, and Everard Sancreed stood on the 3rd step of his own staircase, in front of 600 of his neighbours, and discovered that a man may be perfectly well dressed, perfectly composed, in possession of 40,000 a year and 400 years of unbroken descent, and still be, in the space of a single heartbeat, the smallest object in a very large room. The ball went on. That was the terrible thing about balls. They went on. The orchestra played. The Duke danced with the Marchioness and with his sister and with 2 young women whose mothers had spent the season manoeuvring for it, and he could not afterwards have said one word that had passed between them, because the whole of his attention was fixed, with a kind of horrified helplessness, on a girl in white muslin who was being very quietly and very thoroughly cut. They did not do it crudely. His people never did anything crudely. They did it by turning half a shoulder, by a conversation that closed like a door as she came near it, by the 4 young men who looked at her and looked at the Duke and did not ask her to dance, because the word had gone round in the first quarter of an hour, as he had known it would, that Culmer had struck her from the list, and where the Duke of Culmer did not lead, 3 counties did not follow. He had done that. He had done it with a sentence, in a morning room over a letter, in 11 seconds. She did not run. That was what he could not get over. She stood by the 3rd pillar with her hands folded and her back straight. And when Lady Marchford's daughter said something behind a fan that made the girls beside her laugh, Honora Fell looked at them pleasantly and did not colour, and turned her head to watch the dancers as though she had come solely for the pleasure of the music. At 11:30 he saw her go out onto the terrace alone. He gave it 4 minutes and followed. She was standing at the balustrade with her back to the lights, looking down the black length of the park, and she did not turn round when the door opened. She only said, without any particular emphasis, "I know it is you, Your Grace. Everyone else in that room walks in couples." "Miss Fell, you need not apologize." She said it quickly, as though to get it over with. "I should very much rather you did not, in fact. An apology would oblige me to say that it did not signify, and it did signify, and I have just spent 2 hours proving that I can be lied to and smile, and I find I have not one lie left in me tonight." The Duke of Culmer stood in the light from his own ballroom windows, and could not think of a single thing to say that was not contemptible. "Why did you come?" he said at last. She did turn then. "Because he asked me," she said. "Because he is 74 and this is the last of it. And he wanted to walk into a room with me on his arm one time before he dies, and he has never asked me for anything." Her chin lifted. "And because I have done nothing wrong, Your Grace. That is the whole of my crime, you see. 3 shillings an hour and a father who drowned. I have thought about it a great deal, standing by your pillar, and I cannot find the place where I ought to have behaved differently. So I came and I stood, and I shall go home, and on Monday I shall teach Miss Pargida her scales, and she will play them badly, and none of this will have changed one note of it. They are fools, said the Duke hoarsely. Every one of them. They are your fools, said Honora Fell. They took their instruction from you. They always do. You might have crossed that floor at any moment in the last 2 hours and asked me to dance, and the whole room would have turned round like a weather vane, and you know it, and I know it, and you did not do it. She drew her shawl closer. And I do not blame you particularly. I do not think you are wicked. I think you have simply never once in your life had to wonder what it is to be on the other side of a door. That is not true. I have. He stopped. Yes. And the Duke of Quilmere, who had been about to say something about his father, and the January morning and the cold office in the city, heard how it would sound, heard himself explaining to a woman who taught scales for 3 shillings that he too had once known hardship, for the space of 9 months, until a good man saved him and shut his mouth. No, he said, you are quite right, I have not. Honora Fell looked at him for a long moment in the light of the ballroom windows. Well, she said, that is the first honest thing anyone has said to me tonight. She went in a little after midnight. The admiral, who had drunk 3 glasses of the Duke's best port and made 2 speeches, kissed her hand at the door and told her to take the carriage and put her feet up, and she went down the steps with her head high and her shawl over her arm. And the Duke of Quilmere stood at the top of them and watched the carriage go, and did not sleep that night at all. The admiral came to him in the library at 2 in the morning. He came in without knocking, as he had always done, a great weathered old man in his shirt-sleeves with his star laid aside, and he lowered himself into the chair opposite with a grunt, and looked at his host for what felt like a very long time. Say it, said the Duke. I have nothing to say. Say it. Boy, said Admiral Lord Kestwick, I have watched men flogged. I have buried 140 of my own. I have never in my life seen anything as ugly as what was done to that girl in this house tonight, and I have not the words for it, and if I had them I would not waste them on you, because you were there, and you have eyes. The fire hissed. The Duke did not move. I did not intend. No, said the Admiral, you never do. That is the whole of what's wrong with your class, and I say it as a man who was made a lord for killing Frenchmen and has never once been comfortable in the coat. You do not intend. You simply move your hand so, he flicked 2 fingers, and a life goes over the side, and you go into your dinner. You should have told me she was your goddaughter. The old man's head came up. And Everard Sancreed, 7th Duke of Quilmere, heard what he had said, and would hear it in the dark for the rest of his life. Aye, said Admiral Lord Kestwick softly. There it is. That's the bottom of it, isn't it? If you'd known she was mine, you'd have had her name on the list in gold letters, because I have a title and a star and £30,000. It was never the girl, it was that she had nobody behind her. He got up slowly, an old man's rising, one hand on the arm of the chair. Her father went into a sea that would have drowned me, boy, and he did it for 11 strangers, and he had no name at all. There's your quality. It don't live where you were taught to look for it. He went to the door. 22 years ago, he said, without turning, I told you to pay me in behaviour. Sir. Well, said the Admiral, I've had my account. And he went out and closed the door quietly, which was worse than if he had slammed it. The Duke of Quilmere did not go up. He walked out instead into his own ballroom, where 600 people had lately been, and which was now the emptiest place in England. 2 footmen were going along the sconces with snuffers. The great chandelier hung dark. The flowers were dying already in their pyramids, and the floor was scuffed white with the chalk they had laid down for the dancing, and the whole vast gilded room smelled of hot wax and crushed lilies and other people's scent. He stopped by the 3rd pillar. She had stood here. She had stood here for the better part of 2 hours with her hands folded, watching the dancers, while the county turned its shoulder to her one polite degree at a time. He put his hand on the cold marble and stood where she had stood and made himself look out at the room from that place, and what he saw was the back of everybody he knew. 3 years ago at the Assembly Rooms at Markford, he had gone to a public ball for a wager. He remembered it very well, and had lately come to remember it a good deal better than he wished to. He had gone to be amused. He had stood in a doorway with two friends, looking over a room of attorneys and their wives with the leisurely contempt of a man who had never had to earn anything, and someone had introduced a young woman who was hurrying out with music paper under her arm. "Miss Fell teaches the pianoforte, Your Grace." He had said something. He could not now recall what. Something civil and glossy and meant for the room rather than for her. And she had said, "How do you do, Your Grace?" in a voice of such perfect and unbothered composure, not shy, not forward, not flattered, not anything, that he had turned his head to look her properly for the first time, and had found that she was already gone out into the rain, because she had a lesson at 4 o'clock and could not stay to be looked at. He had thought about it a great deal. He had thought about it more often than he had thought about any woman he had danced with in 10 seasons, and he had told himself, with a fluency that now made him ill, that it was merely the novelty of the thing. The truth was simpler and far uglier, and he faced it at last, standing by his own pillar at 3 in the morning with the wax guttering. He had known exactly what she was worth. He had known it in a doorway 3 years ago. And he had struck her name off a list because to have her in his house would have obliged him to admit it in front of 600 people who would have raised their eyebrows. He had been a coward. Not a monster, a coward, which was the discovery of that night, and the thing his father had been, and the thing 400 years of Quilmere had been very careful never to call itself, Everard. His sister was in the doorway in her dressing gown with a candle, her hair down her back, her face swollen with crying and with a hard, unforgiving anger he had not known she possessed. "Go to bed, Georgiana. I wrote her name on that list," said his sister. "It was I who did it, and you struck it out, and I let you, and I have been sitting in my room for 3 hours trying to decide which of us I despise more." She came a little way into the room. I said nothing. I saw her stand by that pillar, and I said nothing, because I have a daughter to bring out next year and Lady Marchford is useful to me, and so I stood with my useful friends and I drank your champagne, and I watched a good woman be humiliated in my brother's house. The wax dripped from a candle onto the boards. "I am ashamed," she said, "as I have never been ashamed of anything in my life. And so are you, or you would be in your bed." The Duke of Quilmere looked at his sister across the wreck of the finest ball ever given in that county. "He said I was to pay him in behaviour. He said, I heard him say it. I was 19. Georgiana's mouth trembled. "I have thought all my life that it was the most romantic thing I ever heard, and tonight I understood that it was not romantic at all. It was a bill. He handed you a bill, Everard, and you have been 22 years in default, and tonight he came and looked at the books." She set the candle on the mantel and went out. He stood a long while after she had gone. The footman finished the sconces. They did not speak to him, and he did not look at them, and one of them, a boy of 19 from the village, whose mother had a cottage on the estate, hesitated at the door and said very quietly, "Shall I leave a light, Your Grace?" "Yes," said the Duke. "Thank you, Peck." The boy's mouth opened slightly. He had been in that house 4 years and had been thanked and called by his name precisely once. Everard Sancreed saw it. He saw the whole thing, the astonishment, the swift recovery, the bow, and it was such a small ordinary damning thing that he had to put his hand on the pillar again. He went back to the library. He sat down in the chair the admiral had risen from, and the fire was low, and there was a girl in white muslin standing at the top of his staircase with no jewels at her throat and no triumph in her face, and there would be, he understood, for a very long time. The Duke of Quilmere sat in his library until the fire went out and the grey came up over the park. He'd not do what a lesser man would have done, and he came very near to doing it. Twice he drew paper towards him to write a bank draft. Twice he pushed it away. He could see, with perfect clarity, the shape of that morning, a footman in Quilmere livery on her doorstep, an envelope, an annuity, a great deal of relief on his own part. He could see her face when she opened it. He put the paper in the fire. Instead, he had his horse saddled at 7 and rode 9 miles to Marchford, and stood in the rain outside a narrow house in Cobb Street, and knocked on the door of a woman who taught scales for 3 shillings an hour. The landlady stared at him as if he had come down the chimney. Miss Fell is at her lessons, sir. She don't finish till 1. Then I shall wait. Wait where, sir? Here, said the Duke of Quilmere, and sat down on the 3rd stair of a boarding-house passage in a wet greatcoat, with his hat on his knee, and waited 3 hours and 40 minutes, while the rain dripped off him onto the oilcloth, and 2 lodgers and a fishmonger's boy stepped round him and stared. She came out at 1 o'clock with an armful of music and stopped dead. Get up, she said. Get up at once, you cannot sit there. I have been sitting here for some time, said the Duke, standing, and I find it is precisely where I ought to be. Miss Fell, will you walk with me? They walked along the Marchford quay in the rain, because she would not have him in the parlour, and because she said with a flash of the temper he had never yet seen in her, and would come to love beyond reason, that she had no intention of being seen alone in a room with him and giving that gilded coven anything further to chew. I have come to apologize, he said. I told you I did not want it. I know. And I am going to do it anyway, because I'd not come for your comfort. I came for my own, which is a shabby motive, and I am aware of it, and I have run out of good ones. The rain came off the harbour in sheets. I struck your name from that list because you had nobody behind you, not because of the 3 shillings, not because of your gown. Because there would be no consequences, and I knew it, and I did it in 11 seconds and went into my breakfast. Honora Fell walked beside him with her head down. The admiral told you that, she said. He did, but I knew it before he said it. I knew it on the stair when you looked at me, and there was no triumph in your face, and God forgive me, Miss Fell, I would have found it easier if there had been. She said nothing for some yards. What do you want? She asked at last, and her voice was tired. You have apologized. It is done. If you want me to say that I forgive you, I will say it, 'cause I am a Christian woman and it is Sunday tomorrow. But I would rather you did not require me to make you comfortable, your grace. It has been a long week. I want to dance with you, said the Duke of Quilmere. She stopped in the road. On Thursday, he said, there is a public assembly in this town. Anyone may come who can pay 4 shillings at the door, attorneys, corn factors, the mayor, the man who sold me this appalling coffee. Every family that cut you on Friday will be there, because they will be there for the same reason they are everywhere, which is that they have nothing else to do. He looked down at her, and his heart was going like a boy's. I intend to come. I intend to walk into that room, cross the floor in front of every one of them, and ask you to stand up with me. And they will see it, and the word will go round in a quarter of an hour, and by Saturday there will not be a house in 3 counties that dares to leave your name off anything. That, said Honora Fell, very white, is the most arrogant thing I have ever heard. Yes, said the Duke, it is. That is precisely what makes it useful. I broke it with my hand, and I can mend it with my hand, and I am not proud of the fact, and I do not offer it as a virtue. I offer it as a payment. He took off his hat, in the rain in the public road, and stood bareheaded. You may refuse. If you refuse, I shall come anyway, and stand against the wall the whole night, and go home, and never trouble you again. But I would very much rather dance. She looked at him for a long moment with the rain running off the brim of her bonnet. You will be laughed at, she said. I shall be talked of. It is not the same thing, and I have been talked of since I was 19. He paused. And Miss Fell, I find I mind a great deal less than I ever imagined I would. He came on Thursday. He came alone, in a plain coat, and paid his 4 shillings at the door like every other man in Markford, and the assembly rooms fell so silent that the fiddler stopped in the middle of a bar. Lady Markford was there. Her daughter was there. Half the ballroom of the week before was there, and they stood and stared at the Duke of Quilmere in a public room full of attorneys and corn factors, and could not for their lives work out what he was doing. He crossed the floor. He crossed it in front of all of them, and he stopped in front of a young woman in a made-over gown who was standing by the wall with a cup of negus in her hand and her chin very high, and he bowed to her as he would have bowed to a queen. Miss Fell, said the Duke of Quilmere in a voice that carried to every corner of that room, will you do me the very great honour? And the fiddler struck up, and the room began, very slowly, like a rusted mechanism, to turn. By Saturday there was not a house in 3 counties that dared leave her name off anything. It happened exactly as he had said it would, and there was no pleasure in it for him at all, only a cold and salutary disgust, 'cause it proved, past any argument, that none of them had ever thought anything at all, and had merely been waiting to be told. He watched them fawn on her. He watched Lady Marchford, who had cut her by the third pillar, press her hand and speak of her dear father the hero. And he saw Honora Fell receive it all with an unfailing, gentle, unbending courtesy that gave away absolutely nothing, and he thought, she is worth the whole of them, and she was worth the whole of them a week ago, and nothing has changed but the fashion. He told her so, in the garden of the Marchford Rectory, in September. They will forget it by Christmas, she said. They will remember that I am a music mistress the first time it is convenient. Then I shall remind them. You cannot go about the county reminding people of me for the rest of your life, your grace. I can, said the Duke of Culmer, if you marry me. Honora Fell put down the flowers she was holding. That is not funny, he said. It is not. I have never been less amused in my life. He took a step towards her and stopped, because he had learned at last to stop. I have loved you since a doorway at the Assembly Rooms 3 years ago, when you told me how you did, and then walked away to give a lesson, and I have spent those 3 years arranging my pride, so that it need not be inconvenienced by the fact. It cost you a great deal. It cost me a friend I had for 22 years, and I do not know that I shall ever get him wholly back. He drew a breath. I am not offering you rescue. You do not require rescuing. You have been keeping yourself since you were 19, and you have never once asked anyone for anything, and if you refuse me you will go on doing it, and you will be perfectly well. I am offering you a man who was a snob and a coward and knows it, and who would rather be argued with by you at his own table for 30 years than be agreed with by every duchess in England. Everard, she said, and it was the first time she had ever used his name, and he felt it go through him like the sea. Say no if you must, but say it slowly. And Honora Fell looked at him with her eyes swimming and said, I am not going to say no, you ridiculous man. I am going to say that I will keep my pupils. Keep them. You did not even hesitate. Why in God's name would I hesitate? Said the Duke of Culmer. You are the only person of my acquaintance who has ever earned anything. They were married in the church at Marchford in the spring, and the bride was given away by Admiral Lord Kestwick, who wore his star and openly, and everyone within earshot, that he had known the girl 3 days after she was born, and had said at the time that she would be the making of some fortunate fool. He and the Duke were reconciled. It took a year, and it was never spoken of, and the Duke understood that he had not been forgiven so much as given a second account to keep, and he kept it. The music room at Culmer was opened. There were lessons in it every Thursday, and the pupils were the daughters of attorneys and corn factors and one very shy girl from the harbour whose father had been drowned, and they came up the great drive between the lime trees in a farm cart, and the Duchess of Culmer met them at the door herself. The county said a great many things about it. The county was ignored and got over it as counties do, and on winter evenings, when the great house was quiet and the fires were banked, the 7th Duke of Culmer would sit in the dark at the back of the music room and listen to his wife play. Badly, sometimes, when she was tired, and beautifully when she was not, and remember, with an old cold shudder that never entirely lost its power to shame him, a pen, and a list, and a single line of black ink. Kept that list. He never told her so. It lay in the bottom drawer of his desk to the end of his life, folded, with her name struck through, and he took it out perhaps once a year and looked at it. Pay me in behaviour, the old man had said. He spent the rest of his life doing it, and considered himself, every single day, to have got the better of the bargain.